Hi everyone, I'm J.M.Ryan and I'm back with another reading aloud video for you. Today I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about fairy tales, which are great and also kind of make me feel a certain way, but they definitely have a spot in literary canon and they paved a way for a lot of literary movements. So I'm in support of them in that manner. The most famous today, I believe, in my opinion, the ones that I've heard the most about, so I shouldn't say the most famous, but the storytellers that I've heard the most about in terms of fairy tales are definitely the Brothers Grimm. So the Brothers Grimm, a quick little rundown of their history, which is super fast. Not the history super fast. I'm just going to tell it quickly. The brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm, were born most likely in the 1780s at some point. And the German pronunciation of their names, I believe, is Jakob and Wilhelm, but I'm going to go with my pronunciation as it's what I'm most comfortable with. So they were born in the 1780s in Germany, and they were pretty well educated. They could read and write, and they recognized the importance of passing down what they've heard, which were a lot of fairy tales and lore, things of that nature. They didn't want everything like that to be lost to the test of time, because until then, the majority of fairy tales were not written down and they were passed from generation to generation, people telling stories as they were bored. So the Brothers Grimm decided to compile them so that history wouldn't be lost. So they went to their friends, their family, they went to the townspeople, they went to servants, they went to everybody they could find, and they interviewed them about fairy tales that they had heard. Once they did that, they took a couple liberties with the stories and then compiled all of the fairy tales together into one book, and the original version was published in 1812. And I believe that book was called The Nursery and Household Tales, I believe. And eventually, because the original publication, the stories were quite dark, as you can imagine, and were not meant for children. Over the years, they were definitely softened and geared more towards a Disney happy ending. And that's kind of what we know today. And eventually those stories became known as the Grimm fairy tales. So that's a brief history of the Brothers Grimm for you. I hope it wasn't too boring, but I find any information on writers to be fascinating in how they compiled all their stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to read to you my personal favorite fairy tale, which happens to be Rumpelstiltskin. I've always loved it since I was a child. I find something so fascinating about it. And yeah, just all the retellings of him as well, I think are so great. And so without further ado, we're going to do Rumpelstiltskin from my Grimm Fairy Tales book, which I was really surprised I had on hand during this time of quarantine, but apparently somewhere along the way I bought it. Probably during college or something. I have no idea. All right, so Rumpelstiltskin. Here we go. There once was a poor miller who had a beautiful daughter. And one day, having to go speak with the king, he said, in order to make himself appear of consequence, that he had a daughter who could spin straw into gold. The king was very fond of gold and thought to himself, that is an art which would please me very well. And so he said to the miller, if your daughter is so very clever, bring her to the castle in the morning, and I will put her to the proof. As soon as she arrived, the king led her into a chamber, which was full of straw. And giving her a wheel and a reel, he said, now, set yourself to work, and if you have not spun this straw into gold by an early hour tomorrow, you must die. With these words, he shut the door and left the maiden alone. There she sat for a long time, thinking how to save her life, for she understood nothing of the art whereby straw might be spun into gold. and her grief became stronger and stronger till at last she began to weep. All at once the door opened, and in stepped a little man who said, "Good evening, fair maiden. Why do you weep so sore?" "Ah," she replied, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I'm not sure I know how." The little man asked, "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" "My necklace?" said the maiden. The dwarf took it and placed himself in front of the wheel, and whir, 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 3 times round, and the bobbin was full. Then he set up another, and whir, 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 thrice round again, and a second bobbin was full. And so he went all night long, until the straw was spun, and the bobbins were full of gold. At sunrise the king came, and very much astonished to see the gold, the sight of which gladdened him, but he did not make his heart less covetous. He caused the maiden to be led into another room, still larger, full of straw, and then he bade her spin into gold during the night if she valued her life. The maiden was again quite at a loss what to do, but while she cried, the door opened suddenly, and as before, the dwarf appeared and asked her what she would give him in return for his assistance. "The ring off my finger," she replied. The little man took the ring and began to spin at once, and by the morning all the straw was changed to glistening gold. The king was rejoiced above measure at the sight of this, but he still was not satisfied, but, leading the maiden into another room, still larger, full of straw as the others, he said, "This you must spin during the night, but if you accomplish it, you shall be my bride." "For," he thought to himself, "a richer wife thou canst not have in all the world." When the maiden was left alone, the dwarf again appeared and asked for a third time, "What will you give me to do this for you?" "I have nothing left I can give you," sighed the maiden. "Then promise me your firstborn child if you become queen," said he. The miller's daughter thought, "Who can tell if that will ever happen?" And ignorant how else to help herself out of her trouble, she promised the dwarf what he desired, and he immediately set about and finished the spinning. When morning came and the king found all he had wished for done, he celebrated his wedding, and the fair miller's daughter became queen. About a year after the marriage, when she had ceased to think about the little dwarf, she brought a fine child into the world, and suddenly, soon after its birth, the very man appeared and demanded what she had promised. The frightened queen offered him all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her child, but the dwarf answered, "No, something human is dearer to me than all the wealth of the world." The queen began to weep and groan so much that the dwarf pitied her and said, "I will leave you 3 days to consider. If, in that time, you discover my name, you shall keep your child." All night long the queen racked her brains for all the names she could think of, and sent a messenger through the country to collect far and wide any new names. The following morning, when the dwarf came, she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthasar, and all the odd names she knew. But at each the little man exclaimed, "That is not my name." The second day the queen inquired of all her people for uncommon and curious names, and called the dwarf Ribs of Beef, Sheepshank, Whalebone. But at each he said, "That is not my name." The third day the messenger came back and said, "I have not found a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain near the edge of the forest, where foxes and hares say good night to each other, I saw there a little house, and before the door a fire was burning, and round this fire a curious little man was dancing on one leg and shouting, 'Today I stew, and then I'll bake, Tomorrow I shall the queen's child take. Ah, how famous it is that nobody knows that my name is Rumpelstiltskin." When the queen heard this, she was very glad, for now she knew the name, and soon after came the dwarf and asked, "Now, my lady queen, what is my name?" First she said, "Are you called Conrad?" "No." "Are you called Hal?" "No." "Are you called Rumpelstiltskin?" "A witch has told you, a witch has told you," shrieked the little man, and stamped his right foot so hard in the ground with rage that he could not draw it out again. Then he took hold of his left leg with both his hands, and pulled away so hard that his right came off in the struggle. And he hopped away howling terribly. And from that day to this, the queen has heard no more of her troublesome visitor. And that is the very quick tale of Rumpelstiltskin by the Brothers Grimm. I hope you enjoyed the read aloud. I hope you enjoyed the brief bit of history about the Brothers Grimm. I think during future videos, I might try to give little tidbits of either the authors or illustrators, if it's valid, or stories, characters, what have you. I find it to be so fascinating, and I hope you do too. We're still in quarantine here, or stay at home, stay safe where I am. And so is the majority of the world. And so I hope if you're watching this, and if you're not, pass this along, but I hope everybody is happy and safe and healthy, and that you're all doing okay. And yeah, that's it. Until next time, I'll see you later. Have a great day. Bye.